"Miss Montclair, your masquerade ends here. Now shall we speak as equals?" Heart-pounding, Seraphina realized this moment could shatter her family's fragile legacy or ignite an alliance forged in fire. Seraphina Montclair stood exposed in her borrowed servant's garb, her amber eyes locked with the piercing gaze of Duke Alastair Kincaid, who had just unraveled her daring deception with a single, knowing smile. The air thickened with the weight of revelation, her father's desperate pleas hanging unspoken, as the Duke's words sliced through the tension. If this unveiling gripped your soul, hit subscribe now, because the truth's unfolding will redefine destiny itself. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat, a sharp, uneven rhythm betraying the poise she had meticulously maintained for weeks. Her hands trembled beneath the coarse fabric of the apron, the simple material a barrier between her and the refined world she had dared to infiltrate. Every heartbeat seemed magnified in the hushed drawing room of Alastair's estate, echoing like the distant tolling of cathedral bells. Gray eyes, stormy, unyielding, and piercing as the northern moors themselves, were fixed upon her, stripping away the final layers of her disguise. Each glance felt like a scalpel, dissecting every practiced smile, every carefully staged hesitation. She had believed herself clever, untouchable in the guise of a lowly maid, but now the illusion shattered under his scrutiny. Lord Edmund Montclair, seated stiffly in an ornate high-backed chair, seemed to shrink under the weight of the tension. His face was ashen, lips trembling as he tried to stammer excuses for his daughter, as though words alone could shield her from the Duke's formidable judgment. Yet even in that moment of peril, Seraphina felt an unexpected thrill, a spark that raced along her spine and settled like wildfire in her chest. There was something dangerous, intoxicating even, about being seen for who she truly was by a man whose reputation suggested he spared little room for error, frivolity, or mercy. And yet, beneath the storm of his gaze, she detected a flicker of curiosity, a faint glimmer that hinted at admiration rather than wrath. Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and exhilaration. What game was Alastair playing? And why did the weight of his attention feel less like condemnation and more like an unspoken invitation? A challenge to a duel of intellects and instincts, a dance she had longed to join in secret. Seraphina drew a slow, deliberate breath, letting it steady her, and forced her spine into a posture of confidence. There would be no cowering. Not now, not ever. "Your Grace," she began, her voice low but steady, the words tasting of defiance, truth, and a whisper of vulnerability. "If you insist upon the truth, then know this: I disguised myself not for sport, nor for idle curiosity, but to pierce the veil of your intentions toward a woman you seek only on paper, a creature of propriety and privilege whose heart may yet be as guarded as your own." Her gaze met his unwaveringly, and she allowed herself the tiniest sliver of boldness. There was power in honesty, in the gamble of revealing just enough. Alastair's lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile teasing at the edges, though it did little to diminish the raw intensity of his stare. Every movement of his broad, deliberate shoulders radiated authority. Yet there was a subtle shift in his posture, an almost imperceptible ease, as though her words had caught him off guard in the most delightful way. He gestured toward one of the high-backed chairs near the hearth, a simple invitation to sit, yet laden with meaning. "Sit," he said, his voice smooth, resonant, carrying that inimitable blend of command and intrigue. "Not as a servant, but as the lady you are." The gesture sent a ripple of emotion through her, a heady mix of defiance, surprise, and a dangerous curiosity. This was no longer a room of judgment. It was a stage set for something entirely unscripted, something that defied society's rigid rules and the meticulous plans of her father. In the flickering candlelight, she noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the deliberate arch of his brow, the quiet tension in the set of his hands. Each detail was a message, and for the first time, she felt capable of deciphering it. Not as a maid, not as a spy, but as an equal, daring to challenge the man who had seen her heart laid bare. She took a measured step forward, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her weight. Every instinct screamed caution, yet each fiber of her being ached for confrontation, for recognition, for the possibility of a connection that transcended the mundane rules of courtly intrigue. The room smelled faintly of polished oak and the subtle musk of candle wax, grounding her even as the world seemed to narrow to the distance between them. Alastair leaned back slightly in his chair, yet the storm in his eyes never wavered. "And what do you hope to gain, Seraphina?" he asked, his tone deceptively gentle, yet threaded with the unassailable authority of a man accustomed to command. "Admiration, confession, or some reckless measure of power that you scarcely understand?" Her lips parted, and she let the truth tumble out without hesitation. "I sought to see if the man behind the title, the Duke with all his legends, had the heart to look beyond appearances. I sought to see if you were bound only by duty, or if you, like me, yearned for more than expectation and etiquette." For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle crackling of the hearth. The shadows of the room flickered and danced, as though echoing the tension that hung between them. Alastair's hand twitched, brushing absently against the arm of the chair. A subtle, almost imperceptible motion, yet it spoke volumes. He was intrigued, he was amused, and he was undeniably drawn into her orbit. A sudden movement from her father reminded her of the world beyond the chamber. Yet Seraphina did not flinch. "You see," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity, "I know the roles we are supposed to play. I know the scripts our society demands. But I also know that behind every mask, every gown, and every carefully curated title, there is a truth, a pulse, a spark. I wanted to see if you could recognize it." Alastair's expression softened imperceptibly, and for the first time, he allowed himself to show a crack in the veneer of the unyielding Duke. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Recognition is the first step toward understanding, and understanding is far more dangerous than ignorance." The words sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. Here, in this small, candle-lit room, she glimpsed a possibility that had been forbidden, dangerous, and thrilling all at once. A possibility that perhaps the unyielding Duke might not only see her, but respect her, even, dare she hope, desire her mind and courage as much as her presence. Seraphina finally seated herself, her movements deliberate, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence amplify the electric charge between them. She met his gaze unwaveringly, and in that locked look, a promise seemed to hang, unspoken but tangible. that the dance they were about to begin would be one of minds, of will, and perhaps, against the currents of society's rules, of hearts. Outside, the wind howled along the northern moors, rattling the panes and reminding them both of the world beyond the walls. Yet inside, the chamber became a universe unto itself, a place where deception had fallen away, where courage and wit could thrive, and where the sharp edges of societal expectation had dulled enough to allow a connection unscripted, unclaimed, and thrillingly alive. Alastair's hand lifted slowly, hovering above the table between them, a question in gesture rather than words. Seraphina's heart beat in anticipation, yet she did not move her own. Instead, she let the tension build, the air crackling, every breath, every pulse a testament to the dangerous allure of truth finally unveiled. "What would you risk?" she whispered, her tones soft yet defiant. "In a moment like this, when all masks fall away?" Alastair's answer was unreadable, yet the storm in his eyes promised reckoning, challenge, and perhaps, if fate permitted, the dance she had long craved. And in that silent exchange, the first steps of a story far more perilous, passionate, and unpredictable than either had imagined had begun. The morning sun slanted through the cracked panes of Eldridge Manor's upper windows, throwing latticed patterns across the faded Persian rugs that had once been lush and vibrant. The golden light caught the dust motes suspended in the air, each particle drifting lazily, untouched by the busy world beyond the estate walls. Seraphina Montclair, at 23, moved through her chamber with the restless energy of a caged lioness, her dark curls tumbling freely over shoulders that bore the invisible weight of her family's fading fortune. The manor itself seemed to sigh with every creak of floorboard, each gust of wind rattling the shutters, a testament to decades of neglect. Its towering gables and ivy-clad walls had once been symbols of opulence, echoing with music and laughter during grand balls and summer fetes. Now the halls whispered secrets of decay, the once pristine gardens choked with weeds, statues moss-covered, fountains cracked and silent. Even the stables, formerly filled with sleek steeds and gleaming harnesses, stood deserted, the smell of damp hay and rot lingering in the air. Seraphina's sisters, Genevieve and Rosalind, had chosen stability over passion. Genevieve married to a French count whose vineyards sprawled across Bordeaux, and Rosalind to a Scottish laird with coal-rich lands in the Highlands. Both had secured futures insulated from the economic turmoil that now gripped Eldridge. But Seraphina had resisted. Her spirit was too wild, too unyielding to be confined to the measured steps and polite nods required of a lady-in-waiting to status rather than love. Her mind longed for discourse, for challenge, for ideas that stretched beyond parlors and parlance. She paused before the clouded mirror in her chamber, tracing the delicate lines of her face. Her features were sharp, expressive, and magnetic, a beauty that unsettled as much as it captivated. Her mother, a woman of fierce intellect and indomitable spirit, had called her eyes the mark of a warrior queen. Topaz orbs gleaming with a stubborn flame. Beauty? Yes, but of a kind that drew or rather than comfort. A visage that seemed to promise both defiance and secrets. Seraphina's fingers lingered over the worn lace of her dressing gown, the fraying edges a metaphor for the life she had inherited. Elegant on the surface, tattered beneath. Her gaze drifted to the window. Beyond, the rolling fields of Wiltshire stretched into a patchwork of gold and green, dotted with the faint outlines of farmsteads. She imagined herself there, not as a lady of a decaying estate, but as a woman of agency, her mind and will shaping her destiny. The hum of the morning wind carried faint echoes of village life, the clatter of carts, the lowing of cattle, and Seraphina felt a pang of yearning. Duty had shackled her, but she refused to be broken. A sudden knock at the door drew her back from reverie. "Miss Seraphina?" came the voice of Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper who had served the Montclairs for decades, her tone unusually urgent. "Your father summons you to the study. 'Tis grave news." Descending the creaking staircase, Seraphina felt the house's melancholy seep into her bones. The portraits of stern ancestors, gilt frames cracked with age, seemed to regard her with silent reproach, their painted eyes warning of folly, warning of ruin. Each step echoed, carrying her through corridors lined with threadbare tapestries and long-forgotten trophies of hunting seasons, until the study door came into view. Inside, amid the scent of aged paper and stale tobacco, Lord Edmund Montclair sat slumped behind the desk. His graying hair was disheveled, and the sharpness that had once commanded respect was dulled by years of mismanagement and misfortune. He looked up as Seraphina entered, his eyes avoiding direct contact. "Daughter," he began, voice low, "we teeter on the abyss. The creditors demand payment by season's end, or Eldridge is lost. All of it." The words struck her like a physical blow, yet she did not falter. She studied the ledgers scattered across the desk. The sums, the overdue notices, the mounting evidence of misfortune, and allowed her mind to race. "There must be other avenues," she said, her voice steady. "Perhaps sell the remaining silver, petition Uncle Henri in Paris, or even negotiate with the town council for a lease on the manor lands." Her father shook his head, despair etching deeper lines into his face. "Nothing remains, save one path, a union of advantage." He produced a letter sealed with an impressive crest, the wax cool and authoritative in her hand. "The Duke of Ravencrest, Alastair Kincaid, seeks an introduction. He is wealth incarnate, estates stretching from the Scottish borders to Devon shores. Unwed at 32, he defies the matchmakers, yet he mentioned your discourse at the Beaumont soirée on Enclosure X, said it intrigued him." Seraphina's mind raced back to that evening. The bustling ballroom, the clinking of champagne glasses, the pompous earl dismissing the plight of tenant farmers, and her rebuttal sharp, reasoned, and unapologetic. The room had gone silent, all eyes upon her, and she had felt a thrill then, the power of words shaping perception. "Why me?" she asked softly. "I bring no dowry, only debts and a decaying estate." Lord Edmund's eyes glimmered with quiet desperation. "He seeks substance, not silver. Meet him, Seraphina. For our sake, for the house." Conflict churned within her. Duty battled desire, pragmatism wrestled with pride. To wed for advantage felt like surrender, yet the alternative was ruin. And yet, somewhere deep within, a small voice whispered, a reminder that the world need not be lived by the rules others imposed. If Alastair sought obedience, he would be disappointed. If he sought truth, he might find it in her. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay beneath the canopy of her bed, its faded silks and fraying threads whispering of forgotten grandeur. Moonlight traced patterns on the floorboards, illuminating the gaps between hope and dread. Her mother's words drifted to her memory, carried on the quiet of the evening. "The world punishes dreamers, but it rewards those who dare." Fever had claimed her mother 5 winters past, leaving Seraphina to navigate both loss and expectation alone. And yet, she could not surrender her essence, her fire, her intellect. If the Duke sought a compliant bride, he would find her entirely unpredictable. If he valued depth, he might see a partner, an equal. In the quiet pre-dawn, Seraphina rose. She moved through the corridors with quiet resolve, her bare feet pressing against the cold stone floors, each step a meditation. She paused at the library, where dust motes danced in the morning light, and allowed herself a moment to run her fingers along the spines of books long untouched. Voltaire, Wollstonecraft, Rousseau. Their wisdom spoke of courage, independence, and defiance. Here was the life she had always craved, one of intellect, daring, and autonomy. Descending to the great hall, She surveyed Eldridge Manor from above. The once grand tapestries depicting ancestors' victories fluttered in the morning draught. The worn floors gleamed faintly where light caught them. She imagined herself stepping into Alastair Kincaid's world, not as a pawn, but as a player, ready to shape her destiny. The manor, in its quiet despair, seemed to breathe with her determination, walls steeped in history watching her, witnessing her resolve. And in that resolve lay a dangerous promise. She would meet the Duke on her terms, neither submissive nor shallow, ready to confront the expectations of family, society, and legacy. Whether fortune favored her or punished her for defiance, Seraphina Montclair would not bend, would not break. She would meet intrigue with wit, challenge with courage, and perhaps, just perhaps, discover in the Duke's gray eyes a reflection of the strength she carried within herself. Her decision, though unspoken, crystallized with the rising sun. She would face Alastair Kincaid, not as a desperate heiress, but as Seraphina, the woman, the Montclair, the force that refused to be tamed. And in that encounter lay the first spark of something far more dangerous and exhilarating than mere survival, the possibility of recognition, of respect, and of a connection forged not from convenience, but from the collision of two indomitable spirits. Dawn broke gray and foreboding over Eldridge Manor, the clouds low and heavy, the promise of rain casting a cold pallor over the moss-streaked stone and tangled gardens. Seraphina Montclair, standing at her chamber window, traced the twisted shapes of the overgrown hedgerows with her eyes, feeling the anxiety coil tighter in her chest. The manor seemed alive with anticipation, its groaning rafters and sighing shutters echoing her own unrest. Today, the Duke of Ravencrest, Alastair Kincaid, would arrive, summoned by desperation and necessity alike. And yet, despite the looming threat of financial ruin hanging over Eldridge, Seraphina's mind churned with more than mere worry. A flicker of rebellion, wild and unscripted, danced at the edges of her thoughts. She turned from the window to her wardrobe, fingers brushing over the muted sapphire gown she had chosen with care the evening prior. The hems were frayed, the fabric worn from years of careful preservation, yet the cut retained a dignified elegance. It was a relic from brighter seasons, a reminder of days when Eldridge was alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of silver on polished tables. Her maid, young Fleur, hovered near, attempting an elaborate coiffure, her delicate fingers fumbling with pins and ribbons. "Miss, perhaps a softer curl, perchance a braid?" Fleur suggested, her eyes wide with the weight of propriety and expectation. Seraphina waved her off with a faint, wry smile. "Simplicity suits me better, Fleur. Let the Duke see the truth, not artifice. Let him find substance, not the shadow of what society demands I be." The maid's eyebrows rose in protest, her Scottish birth thickening with astonishment. "Miss Seraphina, surely ye don't." "Especially for him," Seraphina interrupted, her voice firm yet tinged with mischief. Fleur blinked, lips parted, but the girl's hands obeyed, tying a simple ribbon at the nape of her head and smoothing the apron's coarse fabric against her mistress's chest. In the mirror, Seraphina regarded her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone were the elaborate silks and jewelry. In their place, a plain uniform, austere and honest, revealing nothing but her sharp gaze and the subtle fierceness in her posture. For the first time in months, she felt light, unburdened by expectation. The reflection was not a disguise, it was liberation. A nervous thrill settled in her stomach as she descended the narrow servant's staircase, bare feet soundless against the cold stone. The manor was alive with the quiet bustle of morning. The clatter of trays, the scrape of brushes across polished silver, the low murmur of housemaids trading gossip. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, curious to witness what would unfold. Mrs. Thorne, ever vigilant and sharp-eyed, commanded the kitchen with military precision. A tray of tea and pastries balanced effortlessly in her hands. "You lass," she barked without looking up, "bear this tray to the drawing-room. Mind ye dinna spill. 'Tis the Duke himself." Seraphina nodded, feeling the weight of the porcelain tray in her hands, the delicate cups and sugar bowls heavy not with their material, but with consequence. Each step through the corridor quickened her pulse, echoing like drumbeats against her ribs. Voices filtered through the drawing-room door, her father's strained courtesy, the measured clack of polished boots, and then, unmistakably, a voice that sent a shiver down her spine. Deep, resonant, authoritative, yet tinged with something warmer than her imagination dared allow. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door, careful not to stumble. The drawing-room, resplendent in its faded glory, seemed smaller than memory, its gilded frames and threadbare tapestries watching her like silent witnesses. Lord Edmund sat stiffly, attempting composure, hands folded over one another, his face pale beneath the dim afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. Rising with a fluid, commanding grace, Duke Alastair Kincaid appeared. He was not what she had anticipated. No dandy, no idle aristocrat draped in velvet and lace. Rather, he was a figure of strength tempered by subtle refinement, broad-shouldered, standing taller than any man in the room. His riding attire dusted with the marks of the road, suggesting a life spent not in gilded drawing-rooms but in action, in purpose. Raven-dark hair, slightly tousled, framed a face that could command armies or hearts with equal potency, and his eyes, stormy slate gray, sharp, unflinching, swept the room, piercing layers of social artifice as if seeing through walls, through lies, even into the recesses of Seraphina's own heart. He smiled faintly, an imperceptible curve that made the storm in his gaze all the more thrilling. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, carrying warmth yet edged with precision, as if each word was chosen to intrigue rather than appease. He did not ignore her presence. He acknowledged it. Most nobles would have dismissed the maid delivering refreshments, their minds attuned only to status and pedigree. Alastair's attention, however, was deliberate, measured, and electric. "Pour, if you would," he added, amusement threading his tone. Seraphina's hands, steady by will alone, lifted the teapot, the delicate porcelain humming faintly beneath her fingertips. As she poured, their fingers brushed briefly. A fleeting contact, yet enough to send a jolt racing up her arm. A spark, unbidden and unanticipated, danced between them, tangible and insistent. Her father attempted to apologize for her indisposition, fumbling over words that sounded both rehearsed and hopeless. Alastair's eyes never wavered from her face. "I had hoped to converse with Miss Montclair," he said, voice low and resonant. Her views on agrarian reform were enlightening. Pause, heavy with scrutiny, followed. Then, with an almost imperceptible tilt of his head, "Though perhaps she is nearer than we presume." The room seemed to contract around her. The words struck like lightning, illuminating the truth she had feared. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. Her breath caught. The tray trembled in her hands, though her expression betrayed nothing. Seraphina's mind raced. Had her voice at the Beaumont soirée been observed, transcribed, whispered to the highest ranks? Or was this more than circumstance? A thrill of exhilaration mingled with dread, coiling tight in her chest. She had wanted to see him, to observe without being observed. But now the veil was lifted. He could see her. Not the servant, not the silent observer, but the woman, witty, fearless, unpolished. Alastair leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowed. "You have a mind sharper than I anticipated," he remarked. and a tongue not easily tamed. Tell me, Miss Montclair, do you wield it in service of reform, or merely rebellion? Seraphina's pulse thrummed in her ears. She measured her words, aware that each might tip the scales of impression. "Both, your grace," she said, her voice steady, echoing the conviction she had rehearsed only in her mind. "Rebellion without cause is folly. Reform without courage is impotence." A flicker of approval crossed Alastair's face, subtle but unmistakable, a shadow of a smile threading his chiseled features. He regarded her as one might a rare jewel, not to possess, but to study, to admire. "Curious," he muttered almost to himself, then louder to Lord Edmund. "It appears your daughter is no ordinary lady, Montclair. Perhaps you have underestimated her. And me." Seraphina's stomach nodded at the implication. He saw her for what she truly was, and yet he was unthreatened, measured, intrigued. The power dynamic had shifted, invisibly and irrevocably. She was no longer merely the heiress in question, nor the desperate pawn of familial necessity. She was a player in a silent duel of wit and observation, one that left her both exhilarated and wary. The distant patter of rain began to tap against the tall windows, a rhythmic accompaniment to the electric tension in the room. Seraphina placed the tray carefully on a side table, straightened her back, and met Alastair's gaze without flinching. "I suspect, your grace," she said, voice quiet yet unwavering, "that you have come not merely to judge my family's fortune or my compliance, but to gauge the measure of me. Am I right?" He studied her, unblinking. "Entirely," he replied, the single word carrying weight as if carved from stone. Then, after a moment, softer, yet no less compelling, "And I am not disappointed." A shiver ran down Seraphina's spine, one part triumph, one part uncertainty, and a third part something she could not name, something dangerous, magnetic, and thrilling. For in that gaze, in that acknowledgement of her intellect and spirit, she glimpsed a world that promised challenge, intrigue, and, perhaps, a connection ungoverned by social decree. As she excused herself to return the empty cups, Fleur trailing behind like a silent conspirator, Seraphina allowed herself a small, private smile. Today had been a gamble, a rebellion cloaked in wool and practicality. Yet in the face of a man who saw through her, who measured her worth in mind and courage rather than jewels and dowry, she felt alive. The encounter had ignited a spark, an inciting pulse that would draw her into a game far more perilous and intoxicating than she could yet comprehend. The storm outside intensified, wind whipping the rain against the manor walls, a mirror to the whirlwind that had seized Seraphina's heart. Every step she took through the corridors felt charged with electricity, every glance at the drawing-room door a reminder of the man who had seen her, not as a servant, nor as a subject of convenience, but as herself, a force unrestrained, sharp as the moorland wind and wild as the rising tide. And in that moment, she understood the truth of her life's trajectory. The arrival of Alastair Kincaid was no mere opportunity of alliance. It was the opening move in a dangerous, exhilarating, and undeniable story, one that would test every measure of courage, every ounce of wit, and perhaps, the very heart she had long shielded from the world. Seraphina Montclair, heiress and rebel, stood poised at the threshold of a life rewritten, not by expectation nor fortune, but by her own audacity, and by the stormy, penetrating eyes of the Duke who had already seen too much. The revelation hung in the drawing room like a guillotine's blade, suspended above them all, ready to drop and expose every pretense. The porcelain teapot trembled slightly in Seraphina's hands, though her expression remained controlled, deliberate, a mask of calm that belied the storm inside. Lord Edmund's face drained of color, his habitual composure undone as he stammered, "Your Grace, I fail to comprehend." But Alastair Kincaid's gaze remained fixed on Seraphina, calm, precise, yet undeniably assessing, as if every motion, every breath of hers were a puzzle piece he had long awaited. A subtle smile curved his lips, faint yet undeniable. Your poise betrays you, Miss Montclair. No servant carries herself with such innate command, nor possesses hands unmarred by toil. Seraphina straightened, the faintest flicker of pride lighting her gaze, though she did not move to defend herself. His attention was merciless, yet oddly exhilarating. And those eyes, he continued, voice low, deliberate. I've heard tales of their fire. With deliberate care, she removed the cap that had hidden her hair, letting the dark curls tumble in a cascade down her shoulders. The sudden reveal made her posture feel bolder, and her gaze met his unflinchingly. How? She demanded, a note of challenge threading through her voice. How do you know? Alastair's stormy gray eyes softened for the briefest instant, though the intensity remained. Your intellect gleams even in disguise, he replied. I observed, as you intended me to be observed. The room seemed to contract around them. Lord Edmund's mouth opened and closed, futile attempts at apologies spilling in stammered syllables. But Alastair waved him aside with a grace that was both dismissive and polite. His attention remained entirely on Seraphina, and she felt simultaneously exposed and exhilaratingly alive under the weight of it. Why this charade? He asked, voice calm but insistent. To flee expectation, or to essay my character? Seraphina held his gaze, feeling the warmth of his scrutiny, the subtle thrill of being seen, not for station, wealth, or beauty, but for the essence beneath. Both, she said, bold as brass. I'm weary of being paraded, evaluated, diminished. If you sought a docile prize, best depart now. A quiet laugh escaped him, rich and genuine, echoing through the drawing room, easing the taut tension that had coiled around her chest. Honesty at last, he said, amusement threading each word. Refreshing, amid society's veneers. He shifted slightly, turning to regard her father. Your daughter is a rarity, my lord, he said, voice polite but firm. A mind as sharp as her spirit. Relief washed over Lord Edmund, yet Seraphina remained on guard. She had seen how easily flattery could be used as a blade. She probed carefully, eyes narrowing, studying the way he held himself, the ease of his confidence. And you? She asked quietly. What drives a duke to court ruin's daughter? What is your gain? Alastair regarded her steadily, the storm in his eyes tempered by curiosity. Merely curiosity, he admitted, and she felt the subtle weight of sincerity in the word. I observed your arguments at the Beaumont soirée, your courage in standing for those dismissed, the wit with which you unmasked hypocrisy. You intrigued me, and I find that far more compelling than dowries or decorum. A flush crept to her cheeks, equal parts embarrassment and exhilaration. The realization that he valued intellect over pedigree, insight over expectation, was intoxicating yet frightening. Society had taught her caution. Men of power were rarely what they seemed. Even as her pulse quickened, she wondered if the admiration she sensed in him might conceal manipulation. The afternoon passed in a haze of discussion and observation. Tea grew cold and forgotten, the tray long since abandoned on a side table. Lord Edmund attempted to fill the silence with small talk about creditors and estate business, but his words barely registered. Seraphina and Alastair exchanged glances, subtle smiles, the unspoken acknowledgement of a shared understanding that neither could voice openly. Each observed the other, testing wit against wit, insight against insight. The following day, Alastair returned, sans pomp, bringing with him volumes of philosophy and literature. In the overgrown gardens, paths tangled with ivy and wildflowers, they met beneath the shadow of elms, rain-soaked petals clinging to their boots. "Tell me your truths," he urged, voice soft yet insistent. Seraphina hesitated at first, the weight of secrecy heavy. Then, with a deep breath, she shared her writings, anonymous tracts on women's rights, reasoned arguments penned in secrecy and passion. He listened avidly, eyes bright, fingers tracing the margins of her notes. "These could reshape discourse," he said, admiration clear, yet never patronizing. "Bold, uncompromising. Your mind deserves more than silence." Yet even as they found connection, friction arose. She challenged him on the practices of his estates, questioning how he reconciled wealth and property rights with justice for tenants. His brows knitted, gaze steady and unguarded. "I confess, there are shortcomings," he admitted, humility tinged with pride. "I have been guided by advisors more than conscience at times." Their debate was rigorous, invigorating, never cruel, each argument sharpening the other like steel. By day's end, Seraphina felt a thrill she had never known. An equal, a partner, a mind that could contend without diminishing hers. Weeks blurred, a tapestry of misty moor rides and candlelit fireside discussions, clandestine exchanges in deserted corridors, and walks beneath blooming night jasmine that perfumed the evening air. Secrets were shared, personal histories disclosed. Alastair revealed his youth. Orphaned early, raised by guardians who prized position over passion, learning obedience and duty at the expense of desire. "I've rejected alliances, matches, entire arrangements," he confided one night, voice low, firelight casting shadows across his face. "None offered what I sought, depth, truth, a mind that can challenge mine." Seraphina tested him subtly, introducing him to acquaintances with radical views, daring him to confront her ideals with reasoned dissent. He engaged without condescension, his respect growing in tandem with their debates. And yet, obstacles persisted. London salons whispered of scandal. Letters from her sisters alternated between caution and veiled scorn, warning her of ruin should she entangle herself with a duke. Baron Leclerc, a former suitor with ambitions still smoldering, spread venomous rumors of the duke's supposed indifference and cruelty. Doubt crept, a shadow flickering at the edges of her confidence. Yet Alastair's consistency, his unwavering attention to truth and insight, slowly eroded it. He arrived as promised, quietly, deliberately, untroubled by rumor, and always observing her as an equal. Their conversations deepened, intimacy forming not of passion alone, but of respect, mutual understanding, and challenge. One evening, under the canopy of night jasmine heavy with perfume, Alastair took her hand, the warmth of it grounding, yet electrifying. "Let us court unconventionally," he murmured, eyes dark and serious beneath the moonlight. "Time to know hearts, not rush to salvage. We shall discover, unhurried, whether our spirits align." Seraphina felt the flutter of hope, mingled with the caution that society and past disappointments had instilled in her. "And if they do not?" she asked softly, voice almost lost in the whisper of leaves and night breeze. He smiled, the expression rare, unguarded. "Then we learn and no harm done. But I sense that they will. And if we fail honestly with integrity intact." The words resonated deep within her. Perhaps this was what she had longed for. A courtship not dictated by contracts or dowries, but by mind, spirit, and courage. Hope flickered amid shadows of past fears, bright and unyielding. And in that moment, the gardens of Eldridge, tangled with wild ivy and night-blooming jasmine, seemed transformed, a place not of decay, but of possibility. The tension of societal expectation remained, ever present. Letters still arrived from distant relatives, subtly disapproving notes in French from her sister Genevieve, admonishing restraint, caution, prudence. Baron Leclerc's intrigues did not fade, nor did gossip cease in the salons of London. Yet Seraphina met each challenge with the same poise and intellect that had captured Alastair's attention in the first place. Each meeting, each conversation, each shared secret built an invisible bridge across the gulf of expectation, connecting them in a way that neither convention nor prejudice could dismantle. In Alastair's presence, she was neither a pawn nor a prize. She was a woman whose thoughts, convictions, and passions commanded attention, respect, and, yes, admiration. By the end of that month, the Montclairs had become witnesses to a slow transformation, not just of perception but of circumstance. Lord Edmund, initially anxious and doubtful, had begun to recognize that his daughter's audacity was not folly, but rare wisdom, and that Alastair's attentiveness was no mere charm, but genuine consideration. Fleur, ever the loyal observer, whispered with glee about the dances of glances and the subtle tilts of smiles, noting that her mistress had never seemed so alive. Seraphina herself felt a stirring she had not expected. A cautious hope that intellect, courage, and authenticity could not merely survive the scrutinizing gaze of a duke, but could flourish. In the tangled paths of the overgrown garden, amidst the scent of jasmine and wet earth, she realized that she was, at last, stepping into a life of her own choosing. A life where observation was not subservience, where dialogue replaced deference, and where a hand offered in curiosity and equality could spark a fire she had long hidden. And as the night deepened, the rain finally breaking over Eldridge in soft, silvery sheets, Seraphina closed her eyes for a heartbeat and let herself believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the storm would not sweep her away, but set her free. The turning came swift and unrelenting, like a summer gale tearing through the Wiltshire woods, leaving shattered leaves and exposed roots in its wake. Seraphina had always found solace in Eldridge Manor's folly, a forgotten pavilion crumbling beneath ivy and moss, where the stones held the whispers of centuries and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and old mortar. It was here, amidst the solitude of broken columns and birdless shadows, that she poured her thoughts onto parchment, her pen scratching out treatises on justice, equality, and reason. This afternoon, however, the quiet sanctuary held an unfamiliar tension. Alastair Kincaid arrived without the usual flourish, stepping across the fallen tiles with a gravity that silenced the rustle of the surrounding leaves. His riding cloak was damp, clinging to him like a second skin, and his gray eyes, stormy, unyielding, bore into her with an intensity that tightened her chest. "There's truth I must share," he began, voice low, grave, carrying the weight of inevitability, "lest it poison what blooms between us." Seraphina's breath caught. She had long feared imperfections, flaws, secrets, any revelation that might shatter the fragile connection they had nurtured. Her fingers, still smeared with ink from her latest treatise, flexed against the parchment. "You speak as though it is your burden to bear alone," she said softly, though her heart hammered in her ribs. Alastair did not answer immediately. Instead, he paced the mossy stones of the pavilion, boots crunching against the grit, hands unconsciously clasped behind his back. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, controlled, yet threaded with a vulnerability she had never before glimpsed. "My title rests on fragile ground," he admitted. "My mother, a marquise's daughter, loved a lowly tutor from Edinburgh, my true sire. To shield scandal, she wed a frail viscount who claimed me as his own before his untimely death. Society believes the fable. Exposure would topple all." The words landed with the subtle force of a physical blow. Seraphina staggered slightly backward, gripping the edge of the crumbling balustrade for support. The revelation threatened to tip her world into chaos. The pillars of expectation she had long defied now seemingly strengthened against her. And yet, as she looked at him, stripped of arrogance, the composure that often masked his intensity now faltering, something unexpected surged: empathy. She had fought for the right to define herself beyond the whispers of society, and she recognized in his confession the same suffocating chains of reputation and expectation that had bound her own family. "Birth defines not worth," she said softly, letting the words float between them. "Only character does." Alastair's storm-gray eyes softened, the tautness in his jaw easing. "You see beyond veils," he murmured, almost in awe. A faint relief illuminated his features, and for a moment the world seemed still, the folly holding its breath, listening. But the fragile bubble of solace was not to last. The revelation, however carefully conveyed, had a ripple that reached beyond the confines of the pavilion. Leclerc's spies, ever watchful, had caught wind of the secret, and it spread like wildfire across the salons and drawing rooms of Wiltshire and London. Invitations ceased abruptly, acquaintances whispered in shadows, and peers who had once nodded to Seraphina's presence now avoided even eye contact with Alastair. "Your association taints?" a colleague sneered during a rare council meeting in his Devonshire estate, the accusation sharp and cutting. "Best you distance yourself from scandal before it consumes you." Seraphina felt the bite of guilt pierce her chest. "I've cost you alliances," she whispered later, her hand brushing against his as they walked the misty paths of his gardens. "No," Alastair countered firmly, gripping her hand and holding it, anchoring her. "You've given purpose. Without your counsel, without your courage, I might have faltered long ago. The world may whisper, but we act." Tension mounted further when Genevieve, ever the cautious sister, arrived unexpectedly, escorted by her comte from Bordeaux. The older woman's expression was a mask of polite concern, but the undercurrent of envy and fear was unmistakable. "Seraphina," she began carefully, voice lilting in the French she had never quite abandoned, "this Duke's secret, it will doom you. The safest course is to wed prudently, salvage Eldridge and our family's remaining honor." Seraphina's gaze hardened, seeing past the veneer of care to the envy that lingered. Genevieve's life had been one of quiet compromise, filled with privileges purchased by compliance and submission to expectation. "I cannot," she said softly, shaking her head, "cede my life to the whims of fear or society's cruelty. I will not live beneath their judgment when truth and love demand courage." The tension carried them through the days and into a village assembly, where Alastair's advocacy for tenant reforms drew attention, and ire, from neighbors and local landowners. Hecklers, fueled by whispered rumors of illegitimacy and scandal, accused him of fraud and folly. The crowd's jeers rose like a tide, threatening to drown reason in spectacle. Seraphina stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and commanding, cutting through the cacophony. "Judge deeds, not whispers. Measure by justice, not inherited slander." The words, firm and unwavering, carried a weight that silenced murmurs, demanding acknowledgement. For a fleeting moment, the villagers paused, considering the courage of a woman willing to speak truth to fear. In that act, their bond deepened. Alastair, watching her, felt the pulse of admiration, respect, and the stirrings of something far more dangerous. Desire mingled with trust. They returned to the folly, hearts still racing from confrontation and public scrutiny. Alone beneath the crumbling stone and creeping ivy, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked leaves, their restraint fractured. A kiss, tentative, hesitant, yet tender, sealed the vulnerability between them. Fingers brushed, palms met, and for a brief, fragile heartbeat, the world narrowed to the pulse of warmth, the gravity of their shared truth. "I want you," Alastair whispered against her hair, the low cadence of his voice stirring her more than the heat of scandal or the thrill of defiance. "Not for convenience, not for appearances, as partner, equal in thought and spirit." Seraphina felt a surge of emotion, wild and uncontainable, yet doubt lingered at the edges. Was this love born of the heart, or merely a necessity forged by social pressures, scandals, and the desperate need to anchor themselves amid turmoil? The question pricked at her consciousness, a reminder that passion alone could not safeguard against the machinations of gossip, the cunning of adversaries, or the cruel judgment of society. Night fell softly over Eldridge, and the folly seemed to sigh in relief. The stones and moss bathed in silver moonlight. The intimacy of their confession, the mingling of trust and desire, cast the past grievances and public scrutiny into shadow, but did not entirely erase them. Seraphina felt the weight of every choice ahead: her family's survival, her reputation, and the fragile yet undeniable spark with Alastair, balanced delicately on the edge of propriety and longing. Even as they lingered together, hands entwined, their gazes locked, the whispers of London's salons, the letters from cautious sisters, and the schemes of Baron Leclerc loomed, threatening to snatch their nascent bond from the tender space they had carved for themselves. Yet in that moment, amidst the ruins of the folly, the rain, and the scent of jasmine that had somehow persisted among the stones, they had made a choice: to confront truth, to embrace courage, and to seek the kind of partnership that had, until now, existed only in dreams and clandestine hopes. It was a turning point, one that would ripple outward through Eldridge, Wiltshire, and beyond. The unmasking of birth, the exposure of vulnerability, the risk of scandal, and the assertion that intellect, passion, and integrity could not merely endure, they could flourish. And as Seraphina laid her pen aside, heart racing, she realized that while the world might whisper and scheme, her destiny, and perhaps love itself, had begun to unfold irrevocably under the shadowed eaves of Eldridge's forgotten pavilion. In the silence that followed, the folly seemed to exhale, carrying the echoes of their laughter, their whispered confessions, and the first tentative steps toward a union not forced by circumstance, but chosen by courage and truth. Seraphina allowed herself the briefest smile, daring to imagine a future where intellect, honor, and heart could coexist, and where Alastair Kincaid might not simply be a Duke of Fortune, but the partner she had always longed for, equal in every way that mattered. And in the distance, the first crackle of autumn whined through the Wiltshire woods seemed less a herald of change and more a benediction, a promise that, while trials would come, they would face them together, undaunted, unshaken, and unafraid. Despair descended like winter's unrelenting frost, freezing the fragile shoots of their bond. Whispers evolved into outright assault. A scathing broadsheet, anonymous but reeking of Leclerc's malice, proclaimed Alastair's bastard origins, citing forged documents that twisted truth into slander. Parliament erupted, alliances fractured, votes lost on key bills. Alastair retreated to his northern keep, summoning Seraphina. "Come, if you will." The journey north, through relentless sleet, mirrored her turmoil. Eldridge's creditors pressed harder, her father ailing under strain. "You've doomed us," he rasped, eyes accusing. At Ravencrest Castle, perched on craggy Scottish cliffs, Alastair awaited, haggard yet resolute. "This storm I foresaw," he admitted, "but not its ferocity." They argued fiercely. Seraphina, fearing entrapment, accused manipulation. "Did you court me knowing scandal would bind us?" Hurt flashed in his eyes. "I sought truth, not chains." External pressures mounted. A summons from the Crown's auditors, questioning his title. Society shunned them. Genevieve disavowed visits. Rosalind's letters begged retreat. Leclerc appeared at a tense gathering, smirking. "Withdraw, Miss Montclair, or watch him fall." Isolation deepened. Seraphina fell ill, feverish doubts consuming her. "Perhaps we're fools," she whispered alone, staring at crashing waves. Alastair's temper flared in a parliamentary defeat, blaming her influence. "Your fire burns bridges." The words wounded, driving her to flee southward, heart shattered, convinced love was society's cruel jest. In Eldridge's silence, despair peaked. Creditors seized lands, her father collapsed. "All for pride," he murmured. Seraphina, alone with regrets, questioned her defiance. Had authenticity cost too dearly? From the abyss rose a flicker of resolve, kindled by unexpected embers. A letter from Alastair arrived amid Eldridge's chaos. "Forgive my haste. Your absence reveals my folly. I need your counsel, not your silence." Enclosed was a draft bill for women's property rights, annotated with her earlier suggestions. "We reform together or not at all." The words pierced her despair, awakening courage. Meanwhile, Fleur uncovered Leclerc's forgery. Paid witnesses recanted, exposing his jealousy over a spurned suit years prior. Armed with proof, Seraphina confronted her father. "We fight, not flee." Revived, Lord Edmund rallied distant kin. She journeyed north again, storm-tossed but steadfast. At Ravencrest, Alastair met her at the gates, remorse etched deep. "I faltered," he confessed, fearing loss. In the castle's great hall, warmed by roaring hearths, they reconciled through raw dialogue, admitting fears, forging vows of equality. "No more secrets," she demanded. He pledged, partners in all. A pivotal choice emerged. Alastair would address Parliament, owning his lineage to reclaim narrative. Seraphina, inspired, penned a public defense, rallying reformers. Their reunion sparked intimacy, shared plans by candlelight, a tender embrace sealing commitment. Hope reignited. With Leclerc's downfall imminent, they prepared for confrontation, united in purpose. The House of Lords chamber thrummed with anticipation, chandeliers casting golden light on assembled peers, their murmurs a prelude to storm. Alastair stood at the podium, Seraphina in the gallery above, her presence a silent bulwark. "My lords," he began, voice resonant, "rumors assail my birth, let truth prevail." He laid bare his origins not as shame, but as testament to merit over blood. Gasps echoed. Leclerc rose, venomous. "Fraud! He mocks our order." But Alastair countered with evidence, recanted testimonies, forged seals exposed. Chaos erupted. Allies surged forward, decrying Leclerc's deceit. Seraphina's treatise, circulated covertly, swayed waverers. Reform demands integrity, not pedigree. Twists unfolded. A hidden ally, the Comte, Genevieve's husband, testified against Leclerc's bribes, revealing broader corruption. Fists clenched, peers voted. Leclerc ousted, Alastair's title affirmed. Outside, society reeled. Salons buzzed with their defiance. In private triumph, Alastair and Seraphina wed quietly in Ravencrest's chapel, vows echoing partnership. Through tempests, we endure, he whispered. Their union sealed reform's momentum. A bill passed, easing enclosures. Joy amid relief. A passionate night, bodies entwining in earned victory. Years unfolded like a well-tended garden, blooming with purpose and peace. Seraphina and Alastair's marriage flourished in Ravencrest's halls, now alive with intellectual gatherings where reformers mingled freely, sparking changes in education and rights. Their daughter, Isolde, named for a Scottish ancestress, grew inquisitive, her laughter echoing through estates restored by prudent stewardship. Seraphina's books gained acclaim, challenging norms without apology, while Alastair's parliamentary influence expanded, guided by their shared vision. Subplots resolved. Lord Edmund, debts cleared, found contentment in Wiltshire. Sisters, inspired, pursued passions. Genevieve advocating in French courts, Rosalind reforming Highland clans. Scandals faded, replaced by admiration for their authenticity. On a cliffside overlooking the sea, marking a decade, Alastair held Seraphina. We built this against all, she smiled, heart full. And we'll build more. Their legacy. A world inching toward equity, hope radiant as dawn. How did this ending resonate with you? Comment below and subscribe for more tales of defiant hearts.